Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. Let's continue with The Missing Chums. Chapter 9, Black Snake Island. In spite of Aunt Gertrude's ingenuous explanation of the letter, the Hardy boys were not quite satisfied. When they left the house, they walked downtown discussing the matter. Aunt Gertrude may be right, but somehow I think this fellow sent the letter to the house, believing Dad was still there, declared Joe. But if they knew he was at the house, or thought he was at the house, he would know we weren't kidnapped. Yes, that's right, Joe admitted, puzzled. I'm hanged if I can figure it out, but I still think there is more to the letter than Aunt Gertrude imagines. I have that idea myself. You notice that they were very particular to tell how the ransom money was to be delivered. That was quite an elaborate stunt, to have the money thrown off the train at a grade crossing. That would mean that the crooks would come along in a car, snatch up the package, and be away without much risk of capture. They'd hardly go to the trouble of outlining all that if they didn't mean something by it. Yes, if the letter was only sent as a blind to bring Dad back to Bayport, you'd hardly think they'd go into all that detail. Still, Frank pointed out, here we are, safe and sound, haven't been kidnapped yet, and nobody has tried to kidnap us. If that letter has been sent to Chet's people, for instance, or to the Hoopers, they would have something to worry about. Suddenly, he stopped and looked at Joe. Say, he exclaimed, here's an idea. What? Chet and Biff, declared Frank excitedly. Don't you see? This may have something to do with them. Chet and Biff are missing. Perhaps they've been kidnapped. But why should anyone kidnap them? Joe looked wonderingly at his brother. In mistake for us. Don't you see it? Perhaps this gang mistook Chet and Biff for you and me and kidnapped them. And then they wrote the letter to Dad. Gee, I never thought of that, Joe exclaimed. I'll bet dollars to donuts that you're right. Don't you remember the day we were all out in the boat, and the three men came so close to us? Remember how closely they looked at Chet and Biff? Perhaps those fellows had been tipped off that you and I were on the boat and wanted to get a look at us, so they could identify us when they got a chance to kidnap us. And instead of looking at us, they picked on Chet and Biff. They knew we owned the boat, but they wouldn't know that Biff had one. Therefore, they'd think that chap at the wheel would be either you or me. It hangs together all right. And then remember when we saw those same three men hanging around the Morton farm? They must have trailed Chet home to see where he lived, and all the time they thought he was either you or me. I think we're getting at the truth of it, Joe. When Chet and Biff started on their trip, those fellows followed them, or lay in wait for them someplace and captured them. Just then the Hardy boys met Phil and Tony in front of the fruit stand of their friend Nick, each with a bottle of pop. Hello, was Tony's greeting. Have one? He invited, indicating the pop. Don't mind if we do, even if it's just after breakfast. Nick opened 2 bottles of pop and slapped them down on the counter. Hot day, huh? He said at the boys as they reached for straws. You bet it's hot. After a satisfying gulp of the ice-cold pop, the Hardy boys turned to their chums. We have a clue, declared Frank. About what? About Chet and Biff. Yeah? Tony and Phil were immediately interested. What's up? Frank then told them of the incident of the letter, and often prompted by his brother, exclaimed how they had connected it with the disappearance of their chums. And so, he concluded, we've figured that Chet and Biff may have been kidnapped in mistake for us. There's something in that, agreed Phil. And here's something else that may help. I forgot about it when we were searching for the fellows the other day. Just a little while before they went on their trip, I was talking with Chet and Biff, and I remember that Biff said he had always wanted to visit Black Snake Island. Black Snake Island? Exclaimed Frank. That's the place that's overrun with big black snakes, isn't it? Nobody ever goes there. That's the place, and that's why it's called Black Snake Island. And you can't blame people for staying away from it with a name like that. But Biff had read about it and said he wanted to see what the place was like. That's Biff all over, agreed Tony. But did they decide to go? Chet didn't want to go. Black Snake Island is down the coast, and Chet wanted to go up the coast. Sure, that's why we searched up the coast, because Chet said that that's where they were going, Frank declared. Well, Biff kept on saying that he wanted to see Black Snake Island anyway, and while Chet wasn't very much stuck with the idea, he might have gone there. Perhaps they went that way after all. I wish we'd known that when we made our first search. They might have started for Black Snake Island and got captured on the way. Frank drained the last of the bottle of pop. Say, I'd like to start another search for them and go down the coast in that direction. What do you say? I guess I can get away all right, said Tony. How about you, Phil? It's okay with me. We'll probably find it hard to get away, said Frank doubtfully. We'll go home and ask Mother anyway. You see, we're supposed to stay around the house now that Dad's away, but Aunt Gertrude is there, and if we can get away without her seeing us, I guess it'll be all right. Look us up if you can go. You bet we will. Let's go home now, Joe, and see if we can. The boys separated, and Frank and Joe returned home. They found their mother and Aunt Gertrude still discussing the letter. It's absolute foolishness, Laura Hardy, that's all it is, Aunt Gertrude declared. You'll just scare the man out of his wits, and he'll be back here on the first train. Well, I've sent the message, and at least I'll know where he is. I haven't had any word from Fenton since he left, and it's been making me nervous. Fiddlesticks. The man is too busy to write. It isn't like him not to drop a line every 2 or 3 days. He is usually very particular about it. He always sends me a note, at least twice a week, while he's away. Well, sighed Aunt Gertrude, as though giving it up as a bad job, I suppose you know your own affairs best. But I'm telling you, I would not have sent that telegram. There. And she picked up her knitting needles, flashing furiously. What's the matter? Asked Frank. Little boys should be seen and not heard, grunted Aunt Gertrude, glaring at him over the top of her spectacles. I sent a telegram to Father telling him about the letter, their mother explained. I think he should know about it. And besides, I've been worrying because he hasn't written. Where did you address the telegram? He gave me 2 addresses where I would be sure to find him in Chicago, said Mrs. Hardy. He gave me the name of a hotel he would be staying at, and he also said that the police headquarters would reach him. I sent the same telegram to each place, so I'd be sure to get it to him. Waste of money, sniffed Aunt Gertrude. At that moment the phone rang, and Mrs. Hardy answered it. The phone was in the hall, and the boys could not hear their mother's words. But when she returned to the room a few minutes later, they saw that she was pale with apprehension. The telegraph company tells me that there is no Fenton Hardy registered at the hotel, and that the police headquarters say he hasn't shown up there either, she announced gravely. The boys looked at each other in surprise. That's strange, said Frank. And he hasn't written? There's something mighty odd about this. Aunt Gertrude for once was at a loss for words. The knitting needles remained suspended in mid-air. Behind the spectacles her eyes were wide and her mouth remained open in astonishment. This affair gets more puzzling every minute, remarked Frank at last. Of course, Dad might have been delayed, or he might have picked up a clue that took him away from Chicago after all. But I think he would have written. Perhaps he didn't report to police headquarters in Chicago because he was afraid Baldy Turk's gang might find out he was in the city, Joe suggested. There's something in that. But why wouldn't he be at the hotel? Asked Mrs. Hardy. He might be there under an assumed name. If Baldy Turk's gang are on the lookout for him, he wouldn't register under his real name. They would be checking up on all the hotels to find him if they thought he was in Chicago, said Frank eagerly. Perhaps that's why your message didn't reach him. Of course, that's why, sniffed Aunt Gertrude, returning to her knitting as soon as possible. Anyone might have known that. It was a waste of time to try to reach him with a telegram, and I said that from the start. The needles clashed. Oh, I guess we needn't worry about Dad very much. He can look after himself, said Frank, with a warning glance at his brother. Nevertheless, he was deeply worried over the facts that the telegram company had failed to locate his father. However, he was trying to make light of the matter so as to relieve his mother from worry. Joe saw his motive. Sure, Dad can look after himself. There's nothing to be alarmed about. He's probably keeping out of sight in Chicago for fear Baldy Turk's gang will find out where he is. If they ever knew he was on their trail, they wouldn't stop at trying to kill him. He said so himself. If he tried to communicate with us, it might give them just the clue they were waiting for. I suppose you're right, Mrs. Hardy agreed, brightening up. Well, we won't worry about it. Of course we won't worry about it, declared Aunt Gertrude. Worry is unhealthy. Worry has sent more people to their graves than anything else. Look at me. Never worry. That's why I'm so healthy. I'll live to be 100. Yes, it would take quite a lot to kill you, Aunt Gertrude, said Frank innocently. Aunt Gertrude looked up at him suspiciously. I don't know just what you mean by that, young man, but I'll warrant there's something behind it. What are you two rascals waiting around here for anyway? What do you want? We were just wanting to talk to Mother. Well, go ahead. Who's stopping you? I won't listen, I'm sure. If it's none of my business, you needn't be afraid that I'll listen. Not at all. Not at all. Go right ahead. Talk to your mother if you wish, of course. If you want to leave your poor old aunt out of everything, I'm sure I don't mind. I'm not interested anyway. Whereupon Aunt Gertrude indignantly hitched her chair around towards the window and knitted vigorously. Go ahead. I'm not listening. Talk away. I won't listen to a word of it, she said shrilly. Mrs. Hardy smiled. What is it, boys? I'm not listening, declared Aunt Gertrude. We think we found a new clue about Chet and Biff, said Frank. We wanted to go on another search for them. What? Shrieked Aunt Gertrude, quite forgetting that she had not been listening. She wheeled about in her chair. Go on another search for those two boys? Of all idiotic ideas. Laura Hardy, if you let those two children go gallivanting out into the ocean again, it will be against my advice. Where are you planning to look for them? Asked Mrs. Hardy. Black Snake Island. Aunt Gertrude gasped. In her astonishment, she dropped her knitting needles. Black Snake Island? Frank Hardy, have you gone completely off your head? Chapter 10. The Boy on the Deck. Perhaps it was because Mrs. Hardy was determined to show that she was mistress in her own home. At any rate, she gave her consent to the proposed expedition. This was in spite of all Aunt Gertrude's protest, predictions of disasters, and so forth. The terrible woman raved for an hour when it was definitely decided that the Hardy boys should go on the trip. But Mrs. Hardy was firm. If there was any chance that they might be able to rescue Chet and Biff, she meant that they should avail themselves of it. They explained their theory regarding the letter, and although Aunt Gertrude derided it as nonsense, Mrs. Hardy was disposed to believe that their deductions might be correct. You may go, she said, but take care of yourselves and don't take any foolish chances. I'm worried enough about your father as it is. So the boys left the house before Aunt Gertrude could have an opportunity to change their mother's mind, and joyfully told Phil and Tony the news. We're going to start right away, they told their chums. Better get ready. I was speaking to Slim Robinson and Jerry Gilroy. Tony told them. They want to come along too. There isn't room for all of us in the boat. I was thinking of that. What's the matter with the rest of us making the trip in the Napoli? I'll get up another expedition and we'll follow you." "Good idea. One of the boys can come with us and the rest of you can go in the Napoli. Joe and I are starting right away." But when it came time to check up on the various members of the searching party, they discovered that Tony was the only one who could leave that day, and Slim Robinson had to work that afternoon, as also had Jerry and Phil. "We'll all leave in the Napoli first thing tomorrow morning, then," decided Tony. "You and Joe go ahead in your boat now and head towards Black Snake Island. We'll be along in the morning." This was the plan that they agreed upon, and the Hardy Boys lost no time in making ready for the trip. They had the forethought to stock up with provisions for several days, although the run to Black Snake Island would not take them many hours, because they realized that the search might keep them away from home longer than they expected. It was afternoon before they were able to get away, and all through the lunch hour they were in a constant state of apprehension, lest Aunt Gertrude prevail upon the mother to withdraw her permission for the journey. "They'll never come back alive, mark my words," declared their aunt. "They'll be bitten by those snakes on Black Snake Island, as sure as fate. Why, even grown-up men won't go on that island. It's a terrible place. I've read all about it." "We're not planning to explore the island, Aunt Gertrude," Frank explained. "We're going to cruise around it and see if we can find any sign of the fellows." "Cruise around it?" their aunt sniffed. "As if I didn't know boys. You'll not be satisfied until you've tramped from one end of that island to the other. But go ahead, go ahead. I wash my hands of the affair. If you want to waste your life, it's your own. Look out." She swept from the room in great indignation. Mrs. Hardy did not share her fears. She knew her son well enough to realize they would not run into needless dangers, and then she kissed them good-bye. Her only request was that they would not stay away any longer than necessary. The bay was calm when they started out, and the sleuth was running, as Joe expressed it, like a watch. It was a beautiful summer afternoon, and the cool breeze out on the water was in welcome relief to the sweltering heat of the city streets. Spray flickered into their faces as the motorboat raced along towards the eastern gap. When they passed out of Barmont Bay and reached the open sea, Frank headed the boat down the coast in the direction of the Black Snake Island. "It isn't far from the coast. There's a channel of a little over a mile," he said to his brother. "We won't be able to make it tonight, but we'll stop over at Rock Harbor and go on again in the morning. By that time Tony and the others shouldn't be far behind." Towards the end of the afternoon they were in sight of Rock Harbor, a small port where they spied a schooner at anchor in the distance. Rock Harbor was not a shipping point of great importance, but there were always a number of miscellaneous craft in evidence. To enter the harbor they were obliged to pass within a short distance of the schooner, swinging about beneath the bows of the vessel. As the sleuth plunged through the water in the very shadow of the ship, Joe suddenly gave an exclamation of surprise. "Frank, look up on the deck, quick!" Frank glanced hurriedly upwards. He was just in time to see the figure of a boy moving away from the rail, but there was something familiar about the young fellow that made him look incredulously at his brother. "Chet!" "I'm sure it's him," returned Joe hurriedly. "I didn't get a very good look at his face, because he only looked over the rail and then he drew back. But I'm almost positive it was Chet. But what on earth can he be doing on that schooner? Probably he's a prisoner. Let's give him a hail." They shouted the name of their chum half a dozen times, but their only response was from a villainous-looking sailor who glared over the side at them and bade them get away from the ship. "No use causing trouble," said Frank in a low voice. "We'll go now, and we'll come back later." He steered the motorboat away from the vicinity of the schooner, but instead of going on into the harbor, he put out to sea again. "It won't be long until it gets darker. Then we'll go back. If Chet is on the ship, we'll get word to him somehow." "Well, if it isn't Chet Morton, it's his double," declared Joe. "Even if I didn't get a very good look at him, I know he was just about the same height and build and the same general appearance. What puzzles me is why he didn't call out to us. And why did he draw back from the rail in such a hurry? He mightn't have had time to call to us. Perhaps he managed to escape just for a minute or so, and they dragged him back before he could give a shout. There's something in that, and of course he mightn't have recognized us. He would have recognized the boat, I'm sure. There's something odd about this. If we come back later on, we may be able to see him again. Did you notice the name of the schooner? Yes, answered Frank. I watched for it. The Persis. I think what we'd better do is this. We'll go back down the coast and loaf around until it gets darker, and then we'll come back to the harbor and try to come up to the schooner quietly. If there's a rope ladder handy, I'll go up over the side and see what I can find out. It looks like our only chance. You'll have to go easy. If Chet and Biff are held prisoners on the ship, they'll be well guarded. You might be captured yourself. That's where you'll come in. If you hear sounds of a struggle, or if I don't come back, go right into the harbor and notify the police so they can have the schooner searched. Joe nodded. All right, I'll keep watch. Frank steered the motorboat back along the coast again, and for the next hour or more they cruised around, waiting for twilight. At length, sunset came, and gradually the shadows fell. Lights began to twinkle in the town. Lights glowed from the mysterious schooner, now but a rakish shadow, at the entrance to the harbor. When the lads judged that it was sufficiently dark to cover their approach, they returned, then crept quietly up on the ship. They drew up close to the schooner's stern without being noticed, and, to Frank's relief, he saw that a rope was dangling over the side. From the boat he reached out and seized it. The rope held fast. It supported his weight. There were vague sounds from the deck above, the scuffling of feet, a burst of laughter from forward. Most of the men, he judged, would be in port, but it behooved him to move without caution. All set, he whispered to Joe. Right. Frank swung himself away from the motorboat and began to climb slowly to the deck. Water lapped against the schooner's hull. The night was very quiet. Complete darkness had fallen by now. In a few moments Joe could only distinguish his brother as an obscure shadow as he climbed slowly upward. Anxiously, Joe Hardy watched. He saw his brother climb higher and higher until at last his head and shoulders were silhouetted above the side of the ship. Then Frank scrambled quietly over on the deck. He had removed his shoes so as to proceed with a minimum of sound, so that once he had disappeared over the side, Joe could hear nothing. He crouched in the boat, waiting. Finally he heard a low whistle from the deck above. He looked up. He could see Frank leaning over the side. His brother's face was only a gray blur. He motioned with his arm, indicating that Joe was to follow him. The motorboat had been tied fast, so although Joe was somewhat puzzled, he was nothing loath to share the adventure. Seizing the rope, he swung himself free of the motorboat, then began to climb nimbly towards the deck. The rope cut into his hands, and the climb taxed his strength, but in a few moments he was near the top. Frank had moved back from the side into the darkness again. He scrambled over the side and dropped lightly on the deck. Frank was crouched in the shadows waiting for him, and at the moment a heavy hand fell on his shoulder and a gruff voice said in his ear, "All right, young fellow, now we've got you both." Chapter 11. The Island. Joe Hardy started violently. Then, realizing that he had been trapped, he dropped flat on the deck, wriggled to one side, wrestled himself free from the clutching hand. He heard the man who had seized him give an angry grunt, and then he saw the man lunging at him from the shadows. He dodged outstretched arms and rolled over and over on the deck. "Grab him, Mike!" roared another voice from near by, and then Joe was dimly aware that another struggle had started near the rail. He leapt to his feet and raced along the deck, the sailor in pursuit. "Over the side, Joe!" shouted a voice that he recognized as being that of his brother. He fled, hearing the pounding of feet on the deck close behind him. A dark figure stepped out of the shadows immediately ahead. "Collar him!" roared the man at his back. The dark figure advanced with outstretched arms. Joe stepped neatly aside, dodged as the man swooped at him, and blundered to the left. The two men collided violently, and by the time they had disentangled themselves, Joe was a good 5 yards away. The schooner was in an uproar. A revolver roared from the shadows, and the darkness was cleft by a crimson splash. "Harbor thieves!" yelled a voice from behind. "Catch 'em!" Footsteps pounded on the deck. Shouts and bangs rang out. A light flared from somewhere ahead. Out of the shadows rose a man who lunged fiercely at Joe, grappled with him, and they fell to the deck together. Joe managed to wrench himself free and rolled to one side, scrambling to his feet. He heard a splash near by and a shout. "Over the side!" He could hear Frank calling again. His brother's voice was far below, and he knew that Frank must have died from the rail. He was not far from the side of the schooner, and he raced for the rail. Just a half a dozen figures came plunging out of the gloom. Their heavy boots thudded tremendously on the deck. Again the revolver crashed out, and again the tongue of a crimson flame licked its way through the blackness. The bullet passed within a few inches of Joe's head, and he ducked instinctively. He reached the rail. Desperately he scrambled up, but just as he poised for the dive, a great hand closed about his ankle, and someone seized the back of his coat. He felt himself dragged back, but with free foot he kicked out. The grasp of his pursuers relaxed, and Joe heard him grunt from the impact. The man staggered back. That moment he was free. Joe went over the side. He struck the cold water of the bay with a splash and went far down into the depths. Then he found himself rising again, and at last he bobbed up over the surface. He did not know where the motorboat was, but he swam ahead, at the same time keeping a weary eye above. He could see dark figures silhouetted above the side of the vessel, and he could hear voices. "He's down there," declared a gruff voice. "I almost had him," shouted another. "I grabbed him just as he was going over, but he kicked me in the jaw." "How many were there?" asked another sailor. "Two," declared the gruff voice. "Harbor thieves, both of 'em. Come sneaking aboard, one at a time. I caught one of 'em peeping down into the galley where the cabin boy was peeling potatoes, and I followed him till he went back to the side, so I figured he had the rest of his pals down below. I grabbed him and clapped my hand over his mouth and made him wave for him to come up. But there was only one come up, and Bill here grabbed him, but he got away." "Both of 'em got away?" "Yeah. I hope they drown." Then a thrill of fear ran through Joe as he heard one of the men say, "Keep quiet. Listen. Don't you hear someone swimming down there?" The voices died down, and Joe could see the figures leaning over the side as the sailors intently peered down into the darkness. He ceased swimming to tread water quietly. "Take a shot at him," advised another one. Joe let himself sink beneath the surface, and hardly had he gone beneath the waves than he heard the muffled report of a revolver and a splash nearby. He swam beneath the water until his lungs were almost bursting. Then, when he could stand it no longer, he came to the surface again. He was deep in the shadow of the ship, and he had left the sailors behind, still watching the place where he had gone down. "I don't believe there was anyone there," muttered one of the men in disappointment. "No, I guess they both got away," agreed another. "We scared 'em off anyway." "Did they steal anything?" "No, they didn't have time. I nailed the first one before he'd been on the ship long. I guess he just went on ahead to see if everything was clear. Aw, I'm going to bed. As long as we scared 'em off." The voice died away. Relieved, Joe swam on. In a few minutes he caught sight of a dark shape ahead. It was the motorboat. Silently he swam towards it until he had reached the side. A voice whispered, "Is that you, Joe?" "Yes." Frank had already gained the boat. He now leaned over the side and grasped Joe's hand, helping his brother on board. Dripping wet, they both crouched in the boat. "Lucky they didn't see the sleuth tied down here," whispered Frank. "I've been waiting here for you. I thought sure they had you. It was a close call. They mistook us for harbor thieves, yeah?" "Yes." "Did you see Chet?" "It wasn't Chet after all." "No? It was the cabin boy. I peeped into the galley, and there he was peeling potatoes. But it was another fellow altogether. He looks like Chet. So I started back, and I had just reached the side when a sailor grabbed me. He kept his hand over my mouth so I couldn't call out. Then he grabbed my arm and made me wave over the side. I thought you were motioning for me to come up." "It was a bad mess. Oh, well, we're out of it. If we can only get away from here quick enough. I think we'd better wait for a while until the excitement dies down." The boys waited in the darkness. Gradually the schooner became silent once more. The sailors had evidently returned to the forecastle. At length Frank judged that they could escape without trouble. Fortunately, the engine of the motorboat responded immediately, and although the noise of their departure was sufficient to arouse the ship, the sleuth shot away into the gloom so swiftly that their escape was assured. When they were several hundred yards away, they looked back, and they could see the lights of the lanterns moving about near the stern, but they knew that the sailors would not put out after them. Even if they had, the motorboat would not be overtaken. They circled about in the bay for some time and eventually put back into the harbor for the night. At first they were afraid that the men on the schooner might have given word to the harbor police to be on the lookout for them, but as Frank said, their consciences were clear, and they had no doubt of the ability to explain the situation satisfactorily. However, they were not intercepted, and in Rock Harbor they tied the motorboat up for the night, going to a nearby hotel where a sleepy night clerk assigned them to a room. Early next morning they were away again. "Black Snake Island isn't far away now," said Frank. "We should be there in a few hours at the most." There was no sign of the other boys, but Frank and Joe decided that they would not wait, as the others would overtake them at the island or would meet them on their return. They had replenished their boat with oil and petrol, and they had again inspected their supplies of provisions and were in every way in readiness for the least mishap. It was mid-morning before they came within sight of the Black Snake Island. It lay not far from the coast, a low, lean, sinister stretch of swampy land, terminated in rocky bluffs on the seaward side. There was a dank, heavy growth of vegetation, and the island seemed to steam in the summer heat. "Ugly-looking place, isn't it?" remarked Frank, as the motorboat sped on its way. The craft drew closer to the island. There was no sign of life. As they came nearer, the boys could distinguish the fetid swamp land facing the coast, the still silent trees that seemed to droop beneath the scorching sun, and they felt a qualm of repulsion. Black Snake Island was not an inviting place. It lived up to its name. It was a fit abode for serpents, not for human beings. When they were within a half a mile of the island, they heard a vague but familiar sound. "Motorboat!" exclaimed Frank. They listened. They could hear the sound of a motorboat apparently approaching from the far side of the island. Frank spun the wheel. "We'll head down the channel." "No use letting them think we're bound for the island," he said. "It's not likely to have anything to do with our search, but it's best to play safe." The sleuth changed its course so that Black Snake Island was now to one side, and the motorboat appeared to be heading on down the coast. The Hardy boys scanned the dark bank of land intently. The other boat appeared in view at last. It emerged slowly around the lower point, poking its nose inquisitively out into the channel, as though to assure itself that the way was clear. Then it picked up speed and came surging out towards the mainland. At that distance, Frank and Joe could not readily distinguish the features of the men in the craft, but they saw that there were two of them. Frank's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the boat. "Seems to me I've seen it before," he remarked, picking up the binoculars. He raised them to his eyes and gazed long and earnestly at the speeding craft. Finally he handed the glasses to Joe. "What do you think?" he asked. "Why, of course we've seen it before," Joe exclaimed. After a brief inspection, "We saw that boat in Baremont Bay." Frank nodded. "It's the same motorboat that chased us the afternoon of the storm." And we'll continue this story next Friday or Saturday. Thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.